I don't want someone easy to own. I want someone with fire.
"You will come with me," the lonely herder said to the chow woman standing alone in the flea market. The air at the Redemption Ridge Flea Market, 1885, hung heavy like a dirty blanket. The scent of dry wood, horse sweat, road dust, and strange spices from the south blended into a pungent mixture that permeated the thin Montana air. The clatter of crates, the shouts of vendors, the hearty laughter of drunken cowboys, and the din of the jostling crowd created a chaotic symphony of destitution and small hopes. The sun was high, pouring a fierce, burning light onto the empty plot in the center of town, where deals were made openly and without pretense. A crowd shoved and jostled around a long-abandoned, dilapidated carriage. In the middle of the noisy throng, a tall, straight-backed native chow woman stood, her fiery eyes scanning the flushed and greedy faces surrounding her. Her ink-black hair was disheveled, with a few strands hanging in front of her face. Her hands were tied tightly behind her back, the rough rope digging into her wrists, yet she showed no fear. She wore a worn, dirty deerskin dress, scuffed boots, and a thick layer of dust covered her. But her posture was straight, her head held high as if in defiance of the world. "She's Katori," a paunchy man named Silas boomed, "fierce as a wild horse. Any fool who tried to tame her has failed. She's smarter than a crow. These eyes can look into a fire without flinching." He patted her shoulder, but Katori only glared at him, her eyes unwavering. "See, she made me look like a fool in front of the hunters. She just screams like a cat with its tail stepped on." McCord roared and swung a powerful slap. The slap threw Katori off balance, and she fell to the ground, dust rising around her like mocking ghosts. Her lip bled, but she did not cry. She put one hand on the floor, slowly stood up, and wiped the blood from her lip with her sleeve. The whole room fell silent, not out of respect but because they were waiting for something more dramatic. In a secluded corner, standing in the shadows, was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and even with a single cane to support his body, he looked incredibly steady. His intricately carved cane rested against a long bench. When he stood up, the room seemed to fall silent. Laughter ceased, men straightened up, and half-drunk glasses of whiskey paused mid-air. He walked with a gentle gait, moving like a rolling stone settling into place, and stopped so close that Katori could feel the intensity of his eyes and his firm jaw. "How much?" he asked, his voice low and steady. All eyes turned to McCord. McCord, still angry, stumbled back, wiped spittle from his lips, and sneered. "You, a crippled rancher sitting alone in the back? You think this wild mare will cook you a decent meal before she chokes you to death?" The man didn't blink. He reached into a worn leather pouch on his belt and opened it. The pouch made a rattling sound, and then the clinking of silver coins echoed throughout the room, the coins rolling over the table, past boots and empty cups, until they stopped in McCord's dirty hand. "I don't want someone easy to own," he said. "I want someone with fire." Time seemed to slow down. A man's laughter died. Anger was reined in. The man knelt and cut the rope that bound Katori, helped her stand, and took her arm. They stood facing each other in the market. She did not smile or look grateful, but something flickered in her eyes, like an ember in the ashes, a recognition. He didn't ask her name, and she didn't offer it. He simply led her through the whispering crowd. A few men frowned, others were suspicious, but no one said a word. They walked out together, into the cool evening air. Katori held her head even higher, the wind whipping her black hair. She walked without looking back, to a place where, moments before, laughter and curses had filled every corner. Behind her, beside her, the man followed. He said nothing. He held a lantern, its light steady in the night, but his eyes were fixed on her, the woman who would not be broken. Though she was silent, something in Katori had changed, a recognition that perhaps this man also lived by his own rules and would never force her to be silent. So she walked into the night, next to a stranger who had seen the storm in her and had given her something that training or ownership could not: a choice. The old wagon rattled along the dusty roads as twilight descended, casting a silent hue over the Montana plains. Katori sat up straight next to the man, her arms crossed over her chest, her jaw tight. Although she was free from the ropes, the weight of humiliation clung to her like the dust on her boots. She hadn't said a word since they left Redemption Ridge, and she hadn't asked where they were going. Caleb's ranch was on the edge of a low ridge, a modest plot of land surrounded by a fence and a weathered, dilapidated barn to one side. His house was simple, with only 2 rooms and a loft, carefully maintained, but without unnecessary luxuries. He stopped the wagon, slowly got down with the aid of his cane, then turned and offered her his hand. She ignored his hand, jumped down, and silently followed him into the house. Inside, the house smelled of cedar wood and old leather. He showed her the loft, a wooden ladder leading up to a low-ceilinged space above the main room. "The bed's made, clean towels are in the basin," he said gruffly. Then, without waiting for thanks, he turned and walked out, leaving her with nothing but the sound of the wind and her own breathing. That night, Katori didn't cry. She lay on the hard mattress, staring at the rafters, listening to the horses in the barn. She was used to strange roofs, cold floors, crude men, and cruel words. This man was different, too quiet, too clean, suspiciously so. At dawn, before the sun rose, she was already up. She pumped water, lit a fire, and began sweeping the porch. No one told her to. She just knew it was better not to leave things undone in someone else's house. When Caleb opened the door, hobbling toward the barn, she had water on for coffee and was scrubbing a saddle near the fence. He stopped, looked at her, then walked over and placed something on the porch railing, a pair of soft leather gloves, small enough for her hands. "Don't work like you're hiding a sin," he said, without malice. "Work like you belong here." Katori took the gloves, saying nothing, but something in her eyes changed, a small crack in the walls she had so carefully built. That afternoon, while she was chopping wood next to the shed, she caught him watching her, not with judgment, but with simple observation. She worked skillfully. She had done harder, dirtier jobs, so chopping wood was almost a kindness. Caleb returned to his chair by the fire, his cane leaning against the stove. She brought him a cup of coffee. He looked up, surprised. When he asked why, she shrugged. "You paid for me." His jaw tightened. "I paid to get you away from McCord, not to own you." "It's the same," she said, "to most people. Not to me." Silence filled the room again, but it was no longer a cold silence. That night, Katori lay in the loft, listening, not for danger but for him. The sound of him shifting below, the dying fire in the stove, the whispering wind outside. She didn't trust him yet, but she was no longer afraid of him, and for a girl who had spent her life fighting for every breath and every space, that was a start. The first few days at Caleb's ranch in Redemption Ridge, Montana, passed like dust motes in the wind. There were no words, only the sound of work. Katori, like a wildcat caught in a trap, remained highly vigilant. She didn't speak, didn't return curious glances. She just worked. She cleaned the small house, though she wasn't asked. She washed dishes, tidied the barn, and repaired a broken fence. All her actions were a way to prove her worth, to prove she wasn't property but a useful person. Caleb only watched. He didn't rush her, didn't give orders, and didn't show pity. He was a man of silence, the silence of the vast land where he lived. The injury to his leg made it difficult for him to walk, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He saw how she moved, both fast and agile, like a hunting lynx. He saw her care for his horses, stroking them gently yet powerfully, as if there was an invisible connection between them. He saw her sitting outside on the porch at night, her eyes fixed on the rolling hills where her tribe once lived. He saw her loneliness, a loneliness he had felt so many years ago. One morning, Katori was tidying the barn. A powerful stallion had tried to get out and knocked over a pile of hay. Caleb was sitting in an armchair nearby, watching her struggle to clean up. His eyes narrowed. He stood up, walked over to her, and bent down to pick up a leather cord from the pile of hay. The leather cord had been carefully handcrafted, with a small blue stone and a few feathers. It was her bracelet. Caleb picked it up and held it in his hand. Katori suddenly stood straight, her eyes darting to him. He held the bracelet up, and instead of giving it back to her, he said, "Is this yours?" Katori didn't answer. He took the bracelet and placed it in a small leather pouch, then handed it to her. "Keep it safe," he said. "Don't lose it again." She took the pouch, looking at him with suspicion, but said nothing. Another day, Caleb was fixing the fence near the barn. He needed to lift a heavy log, but his injured leg made it difficult for him to move quickly. Katori stood nearby, watching him, and said nothing. When he bent down, she stepped forward, grabbed one end of the log, and lifted it. Caleb was a little surprised, but he said nothing, just nodded to her, and together they lifted the log into place. They worked together naturally, without words, but with mutual understanding. They were two strangers, but the work connected them. The silence between them gradually became more comfortable, but it didn't lose its caution. Caleb didn't ask about her past, and she didn't ask about his. They lived together, worked together, but were still two strangers. Everything changed one evening. It was a full moon night, the air fresh and cool. Katori sat on the porch, staring at the stars. She was used to these stars. They were her friends, the ones who had witnessed her sorrows and pain. Caleb came out and sat down next to her, holding a cup of coffee. They sat together for a long time, not saying a word. "Do you miss home?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. Katori turned, her eyes looking straight at him, but she didn't answer. "Me too," he said. "I used to have a home too." She didn't ask, and he didn't say more. They just sat there, looking up at the starry sky, sharing their silence. It wasn't a romantic moment, but it was a genuine one. Life for Katori on Caleb's ranch continued. She no longer felt isolated. She found a special relationship with his horses. She started taking care of them, stroking and grooming them. The horses, initially wary of her, now trusted her. They allowed her to touch them, to embrace them, and even to ride them. She was a part of them, like a wild horse tamed by love. Caleb saw her change, but he said nothing. He only watched, and occasionally he smiled. He saw that she was no longer afraid. She no longer flinched when he walked by, no longer avoided his gaze. She had accepted him, not as her owner, but as a friend. He, too, had accepted her, not as a servant, but as a companion. They had built a special relationship, one built on trust, respect, and silence. However, that silence couldn't last forever. One day, a man named McCord appeared at Caleb's ranch. He was one of the men who had bid on Katori at the flea market. He came to claim her, and he would not accept Caleb's refusal. "You can't do anything," he said. "She's mine. I paid for her, and I'm taking her back." "She's not yours," Caleb said, his voice low and cold. "She's a woman. She's a wild horse," McCord said, "and she needs to be tamed. I'll show you how to tame a wild horse." He stepped forward, but Caleb blocked him. "You don't touch her," he said, his voice full of menace. "You'll regret it if you do." "We'll see," McCord said. And he left, but before he went, he turned back and said, "I'll be back. And when I do, I'll take what's mine." Caleb turned and looked at Katori. She was standing at the door, her eyes burning. She had heard everything. She wasn't afraid. She was used to such threats, but this time was different. This time, she was not alone. She had Caleb by her side, a man who had protected her, a man who had given her a choice. She was no longer a wild horse. She had found a place to take root. That night, the air was thick after McCord's threat, but not with fear, with a shift that was slowly taking place. For the first time, Katori felt a different kind of weight on her shoulders, not the weight of humiliation or violence, but the weight of trust. She had seen Caleb stand up for her, an act she never thought she would receive. That evening, after their usual silent dinner, they sat by the fire. The flames danced, the crackling wood a whisper of an old story. Katori sat straight on the wooden chair, her eyes no longer fixed on the window but on the fire. The firelight illuminated her face, highlighting her strong features and a faint scar on her right cheek. Caleb sat opposite her, his cane leaning against the hearth, carefully polishing his boots. Their silence was no longer a dividing wall but a cozy space, a safe place for unspoken feelings to exist. "My parents," Katori began, her voice low and steady, neither rushing nor dragging, but flowing like a dark river slipping over cold stones, carrying both the silt of memories and the debris of darker days. Caleb lifted his gaze toward her, but said nothing, as if afraid that even the smallest sound might shatter something fragile trembling in her eyes. "They were Chow people. We lived in the mountains, where the earth was dry and hard as the bones of those long turned to stone, where winter winds could split your lips open, and every drop of rain was a gift from the sky. My parents believed in the kindness of people, even though the world had shown them, again and again, that kindness could be a snare for the unsuspecting. This." She paused for a moment, her eyes closing slightly, as though to keep in the old images, rushing back images that, whenever recalled, made her heart tighten, not because of love, but because of the loss that had settled deep into her flesh. "My father always believed that no matter how wicked a person might seem, there was still a spark of light in their soul. My mother believed in firm handshakes and looking people straight in the eye, believing that if you didn't hide a knife in your heart, others wouldn't hide one behind their backs." Katori swallowed hard. No tears came, but her voice sounded as if it had a thick layer of ash over it. "That night," her breath slowed, "that night, the men came. They said they were thirsty, that they needed water. Less." Caleb noticed her hands clenching, the knuckles turning pale white, as though she were still gripping something invisible. "My father opened the door. He believed that to refuse water to someone thirsty was a sin before both heaven and earth. He filled their wooden flasks, pouring carefully. I remember the firelight from the hearth spilling across his face exactly the same as when he smiled at the neighbors. Only that night, he didn't know he had just opened the door to the devils." "Viz." She drew in a deep breath, then went on, her tone still steady but cold as iron. "They didn't just drink the water. They poured it out on the ground, sneering, and then lit their torches. Our home went up like a bundle of dry reeds. They took whatever they wanted, the wool blankets my mother had spent the whole winter weaving, my father's hand-carved knife, even the wooden bracelet I had worn as a child. They laughed as if every cry from us was a song for their entertainment." Low, her head tilted slightly, her eyes hollow. "I hid under the floorboards. My father, my mother, they stayed to block their way, to give me time to crawl into the dark space. I saw their shapes in the firelight, my mother's arms spread wide, as if she could shield the entire sky, and my father stood in the doorway, unarmed, facing knives and guns." Katori bit her lip until it bled, yet still did not cry. "I saw everything. Through the cracks in the planks, I saw my father fall, blood spreading across the ground like an ink stain that would never fade. I saw my mother dragged away, her hair twisted in a man's fist, disappearing into the night. I heard her scream my name, once, and then no more." A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but because that memory still lived whole inside her, like a wild animal sleeping under her skin, waiting for the chance to rip through the present and leap out. "When they left, only ashes and the stench of smoke remained. I crawled out, knees scraped raw, my hands trembling. I called and called, but the mountain answered me only with the howl of the wind. No one came back." She lowered her head, her voice breaking, but still without tears. "From that day on, I stopped believing that everyone had a good part inside them. I believe only in one thing now: when you open the door, you better make sure you have the strength to close it again." "Len." Caleb sat there. He knew there were wounds no comfort could heal, only ones you learned to live alongside, just as Katori had lived alongside hers, since that night of red fire. Caleb remained silent, not cutting in with a single word. He simply bent down, set his boot gently on the worn wooden floor, and moved his cane aside, leaving his hand resting quietly on his thigh. His eyes held no trace of cheap pity, no look of condescension as if she were some fragile creature in need of rescue. He only looked at her with the gaze of someone who understood so deeply that no words were necessary, only presence. Katori felt it, and that very stillness opened a door inside her, like a river long dammed, finally finding a crack in the rock to break through. Her voice was rough but steady, as though each word had to be pulled from the bottom of memory. I was found by a man from another camp. At first, they thought I was a boy. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. They still made me work. Her lips tightened. Her hands trembled faintly. Heavy work. Work like an animal pulling a plow, like something with no soul left. Day after day, I lived under shouts and the crack of the whip, until I forgot even my own name. Her eyes were bone dry, no tears at all, yet her voice carried the sound of invisible wounds. From that day on, Katori continued, I swore to myself I would become a woman. No one, and nothing, could ever break. In the small room, the fire in the hearth flickered weak, almost ready to die, yet stubbornly refusing to go out, and Katori's eyes were the same, unyielding, dry, holding a hard-edged resolve, as if she had walked through hell itself and brought back that flame to keep inside her chest. She was not searching for comfort. She didn't need the "I'm sorry" or "how sad" that were nothing more than sugar coating over pain. She only wanted someone to sit there, silent and listening, to bear witness to her existence. And Caleb, with a quiet nod, gave her exactly that. For Katori, that nod meant more than 100 empty words of comfort. It was the acknowledgement that she had survived. In the days that followed, Katori began planting wildflowers. She knelt on the porch, her hands digging into the cold soil, carefully placing small seeds, as if she were rebuilding something intangible. Caleb walked out with a bundle of hay on his shoulder. He stopped when he saw her. "Are you planting potatoes there?" he asked good-naturedly. Katori looked up, her hair falling across her face, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "No," she said, "just some wildflowers. Forget-me-nots, lavender, daisies. If they can grow." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "I thought you only planted things you could eat." Katori smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Flowers can still grow on stone, if they have enough water. I don't need much, just a piece of land that doesn't want to cast me out." Caleb stood there, watching her. There was something in her voice, not bitterness, not hope, but a kind of fierce determination. "My mother," Katori continued, brushing the dirt from her palms. "She loved to plant flowers. She said every flower was a letter from the earth. After she passed, I never had my own land again, never stayed long enough to plant anything." She stood up. "Until now, I guess." Caleb said nothing, just nodded slowly, then turned and went back inside. That evening, Katori returned after watering her flowers to find a small package wrapped in a linen cloth on the table. She carefully opened it. Inside was an old paper envelope, yellowed with age. The writing was faded, but the word seeds was still legible. She looked up as Caleb came in, hanging his hat on a hook. "Is this yours?" she asked. "My mother's," he said simply. She saved seeds every spring. She said one day she'd plant them when the home was in the right place. Katori's fingers curled around the fragile package. "Why are you giving them to me?" Caleb looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "Because maybe the home is in the right place now, or maybe it just needed someone who knows the value of a wildflower." She didn't answer, just gently pressed the package to her chest. That night, they said nothing more, but a warmth had settled between them. A warmth not from the fire, but a silent promise that in a place where nothing had grown before, something had begun to bloom. That morning, a wind from the south blew in, carrying the scent of dry sage and the sharp taste of dust. Caleb was chopping wood near the barn when he saw a figure on horseback coming up the main road. A man in a gray suit, far too formal for the hills. His black shoes were polished, his face clean-shaven under a bowler hat. He dismounted as if he owned the land and walked directly toward the porch, a briefcase in his hand. Caleb wiped the sweat from his forehead, put down his axe, and hobbled toward the house. "You, Caleb?" the man called out. Caleb nodded, his hand tightening on his cane. "Who's asking?" The man gave a smile that never reached his eyes. "Thomas Whitfield. I work for the First Land and Title Bank in Cheyenne. Just here to verify some land deeds, a routine inspection." Katori came out onto the porch, drying a towel in her hands. She watched silently. Whitfield continued, pulling out a folded document. "Our records show some inconsistencies in your paperwork. Might just be a clerical error, but I'll need to see the originals." Caleb's jaw clenched. He knew this land was his, inherited from his father, but he had never been good with paperwork or reading fine print. "I'll go get them," he said slowly, turning toward the house. Katori's voice cut in, low but clear. "Can I see what you brought first?" Whitfield blinked. "This is just bank business, girl." "Yes, I know," she replied. "I can read, and I've seen more than a few of these." She stepped down from the porch, took the paper, and unfolded it. Her brows furrowed as her eyes scanned the words. Then she looked up. "You're not with First Land and Title. They don't use this kind of letterhead anymore. They changed it 3 years ago. And this clause right here, it's a foreclosure trigger. If Caleb signs anything under this, he'll lose his land in 60 days unless he pays a loan he never took out." Whitfield's face hardened. "Now look here." "No," she interrupted, calmly folding the paper. "You look here. I've seen men like you. You go from ranch to ranch, finding people who can't read and con them into giving away everything. Not today." She handed the paper back, firm and certain. "You can ride out, and I suggest you do it fast." Whitfield glared between them, then collected his briefcase with a sneer. "Fine, but when this place goes under, and it will, don't say no one tried to help." He turned on his heel and spurred his horse away, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. Caleb watched him go, then looked at Katori. "How did you know all that?" "I used to work on a ranch that lost everything because of men like him," she said softly. "I was just a girl then, but I never forgot the words they used." Caleb nodded slowly. "You're sharper than most men in suits I've met." Katori shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Funny, people used to say I was too wild to be taught, too loud to learn." He looked at her for a long moment, something deep sparking in his eyes. "Then," he said as quietly as the wind, "then they were fools." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sky stretched wide above them, the wind curling around the porch like a whispered promise. Inside the house, the kettle began to whistle. Katori turned to go in, her steps light. She didn't need thanks. She didn't do it for that. But Caleb followed her in, and for the first time, he poured 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. That morning, the air was particularly fresh and quiet. There had been no noise all night, but in Katori's heart, a storm was raging. She knew McCord wouldn't come back alone. Her presence on this ranch, Caleb's steadfastness, would draw the attention of other bad men. This place was his alone, and she had brought trouble. This place could not become her home. Katori felt a fear she had never felt before, a fear not for what would happen to her, but for what could happen to Caleb. She couldn't let him endure what she had endured. Katori stood on the porch, looking at the wildflowers from Caleb's mother. They had started to bloom, tiny petals of purple, white, and yellow flickering in the early breeze. She bent down, touched a small flower, and felt the life in each petal. She could feel the love of a mother woven into them. She had once wished she had a mother like that. She had once wished for a family, a home. She had once wished. A tear rolled down Katori's cheek, a hot tear she had held back for so many years. She couldn't cry. She had sworn she would never cry again, but now that tear fell, soaking into the cold ground beneath her feet, like a promise, a goodbye. She picked up a small bag, put a few belongings in it, and carefully placed her mother's leather bracelet inside. She couldn't take it with her. It was hers, but it was also his. It was a promise she couldn't keep. Katori walked away in silence. She didn't look back. Her boots made light steps on the trail, but inside her there was chaos. She felt a pain she had never felt before, a pain not of the body, but a pain of a broken heart. She had once thought her heart was dead, frozen, but Caleb had given her something she had never had: hope. and now she had to give it up. Caleb woke up and looked toward Katori's loft. The room was empty. He ran outside, calling her name, but only the wind answered. He saw her footprints on the trail, and he knew where she had gone. Without hesitation, he grabbed his cane and walked. He followed her footprints, not stopping for a single moment. He found her at the stream, the same stream they had been to together. She was sitting on the bank, her eyes staring into the water. He didn't say anything. He just sat down next to her, placing his cane down. "Why did you leave?" he asked. His voice was low and gentle, but full of concern. "I can't stay," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't my home. This is your home, and I've brought you trouble." "You didn't bring me trouble," he said. "McCord is trouble, but you are not trouble." "I'm a burden," she said. "I'm a woman with nothing. I can't do anything for you. I can only bring you sorrow." He turned to look at her, his eyes full of determination. "You gave me flowers. You gave me peace. You gave me something I never had, life. I don't want to live alone anymore." Katori turned to look at him, her eyes full of tears. "I can't stay," she said. "I can't face what's going to happen." Caleb reached out and placed a small object in her palm. Katori opened her hand, and she saw her mother's leather bracelet. "I found it," he said. "I found it in the garden. I found it in a place I thought was empty. But now I know it's a place full of hope." He looked at her, his eyes full of sincerity. "Katori, I don't want to tame you. I don't want you to become a different woman. I want you to be yourself. I want you to be Katori, the strong, resilient woman full of fire. I want you to be my partner." Katori couldn't believe what she was hearing. A man had said he wanted her to be his partner. She had once thought she would never have love. She had once thought she would live alone forever. But now she had Caleb, a man who had seen her not as property or a burden, but as a woman. Katori nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know if I can love you." "You don't have to love me right away," he said. "You just have to stay. You just have to give me a chance. You just have to give us a chance." Katori looked at him, her eyes full of surprise. She had once thought he would want her to love him immediately. But he had given her a choice. He had given her time. "I will stay," she said. "I will stay because I trust you." Caleb smiled, a warm smile, and he embraced her. She didn't resist. She felt his warmth, his safety. She had once thought she would never feel safe again, but now she had him, a man who had seen the storm in her and had given her something that training or ownership could not. A choice. The storm had passed. Not a storm of wind and sand, but a storm of doubt and fear. After the moment Caleb embraced Katori by the stream, a deep peace settled between them, like a river after a flood. She had agreed to stay, not because she was afraid of what would happen, but because she had found a place to take root. She had found a man who had seen her not as property or a burden, but as a woman. Katori returned to the ranch with Caleb, but this time she was no longer a stranger in a strange house. She was a part of it. They walked together on the trail. She no longer recoiled when he stepped closer, and he was no longer shy about touching her. When they got home, Caleb said nothing. He just gently placed his hand on her shoulder, a simple but meaningful gesture, like a confirmation, a silent promise. In the days that followed, they rebuilt the ranch together. Caleb fixed the barn, Katori repaired the fence. They worked together, not speaking much, but every gesture, every look was a form of communication. Caleb gave Katori a horse, a white mare, beautiful as a dream. It had no name, and Caleb let Katori name it. Katori named it Dawn. She said it was a new beginning. One evening, after dinner, Caleb and Katori sat by the fire. The flames danced, their light illuminating their faces, highlighting their scars. Caleb looked at Katori, and he said, "Katori, I once thought I would live alone forever. I once thought I would never have a family again." Katori took his hand, her eyes full of sincerity. "You're not alone anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "You have me, and I have you." Caleb smiled, and he kissed her. It was not a passionate kiss, but a gentle one, a kiss of acceptance and love. The firelight flickered in the wind, sometimes burning brightly, sometimes struggling for breath. Caleb sat close to the pile of wood, his hands outstretched toward the flames, but his gaze reaching past it, toward where the darkness swallowed the horizon. Caleb, the night's here, the wind blows as if it's looking for someone who's been forgotten. He gently turned a piece of wood, sending sparks flying up, twisting, and disappearing into the cold air. Caleb, I used to know a porch with a light that was always on. Now, it only hears the rain tapping, like asking a question no one answers. Katori pulled the fur blanket onto her shoulders, her eyes following the glowing embers as they slowly diminished, then faded into gray ash. Katori, in my village, we used to have ceremonies around a big fire. Each drumbeat was the heartbeat of the village. But one winter, that sound was swept away. All that's left is an empty field, with grass growing up to your knees. Caleb tilted his head to look at her. His fingers tightened on the dry wood, as if afraid it would fall into silence. Caleb, maybe we've both gotten used to seeing an empty chair beside us. Katori smiled faintly, but the smile was just a fragile streak of light on the surface of the lake when the wind picks up. Katori, I don't dare put out any more chairs. Afraid I'll have to put it away again. They sat in silence, with only the crackling of the fire and the rustling of dry grass outside the tent. Each falling ember was like a grain of memory, warm when it touched the heart, then quickly extinguished. Caleb, but tonight, this fire seems to be burning longer than usual. Katori, maybe, because tonight there's more than one person watching the fire. The wind still blew, but instead of taking away the warmth, it seemed to carry the smell of burnt wood and leather into every breath. In the vast wilderness, where darkness often swallowed all sound, the two of them still sat there, slowly speaking, like adding small handfuls of wood to the fire to keep it from going out, and to keep themselves from being cold any longer. The next morning, when the sun rose, they stood on the porch, looking at the wildflowers from Caleb's mother. They had bloomed, tiny petals of purple, white, and yellow flickering in the early breeze. Katori looked at Caleb, and she said, Caleb, I once thought I would never have a family again. I once thought I would never have a home again. Caleb took her hand, and he said, This is your home, Katori. This is your family. Katori did not cry. She just gently nodded, and in her heart, something burst open, not with pain, but with joy, with happiness. She had found a place to take root, a place to live. She had found a man who had seen the storm in her and had given her something that training or ownership could not, a choice. The end of the story is a powerful image, an image of peace and love. Katori and Caleb stand together on the hill of wildflowers she had planted. Their love is as strong and resilient as those flowers. The ranch is named Wildflower Ridge, as a reminder of their new beginning.